Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Hope Ropes. I'm Vanessa Azelis, your host. And here we share stories of hope, transformation. We literally hand out hope ropes, and it's all through testimonies of people who have come out of it and are on the other side. So I just want you to get comfortable, listen with an open heart, an open mind, and borrow belief from those who've gone before you. Today, we have a really special guest, and I'm excited to share her with you. This is Jessica Mueller. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you.
Jessica is a registered dietitian who's walked through her own unexpected journey with chronic symptoms. And even after years of working in functional medicine, having access to all the right treatments, she found herself dealing with trigeminal and occipital neuralgia, Lyme disease, autoimmunity, debilitating chronic pain, and I'm sure the list goes on and on. And she's struggled really with which way to move forward. And everything shifted for her when she discovered this mind body approach. And it opened the door not just to physical healing, but to healing on a deeper emotional level. And I'm excited to talk about that. And today, Jessica is free of chronic symptoms. She's now the founder of the Mind Body Kitchen, where she helps people bring joy back into eating while supporting the nervous system at the same time. And her work blends together nutrition and mind body principles, which is incredible. And we're going to talk more about that as well. So, Jessica has quite a story, and she's going to share it with you. And really, that's where we're going to get started. I want you to share with us your story, where it all started for you. What did it look like?
Thank you, Vanessa. It feels, I just have I think you know how meaningful our relationship has been. You were literally the person who introduced me to, you were the portal to the mind body world for me. And I know it's why I found this work as early as I did was through you. And you were such a tremendous source of hope in the beginning and then continued support throughout. And it's been a few years now. So to be sitting here with you today, sharing my story, which is something that I always committed to doing because it's not easy to do. But recovery stories, hope ropes were such a tremendous source of hope for me and healing that I knew if I ever got to that end that I wanted to also share my story. So I have such deep gratitude to be here. It feels a bit surreal to be
It
sitting
does. Yeah.
where we are, but I'm so grateful for it. So I always say my story starts early on with the not so fun stuff to share, but it's important because it shaped so much of my journey and, this experience in this world that I've had. But I grew up in what I would describe as a very intensely religious environment. My family was deeply involved in a small church community, maybe 20 to 30 people on a Sunday. My grandfather was the minister. Half of the congregation was my extended family. And so church wasn't just a part of our lives, it literally was our life. And the teachings were very strict and narrow in how they understood and taught Christianity. And so there really was no space for curiosity or asking questions. And so for me, as a naturally inquisitive child and someone who was never afraid to ask the questions, I really struggled with that from a young age. And when things, didn't make sense to me, I would ask the questions and they were not received well. And so I was pretty quickly given the role of difficult or rebellious
Mm.
young age, simply for really trying to understand God in a way that made sense to me as a child. And so when I look back to on that season, really what it embodied for me was such tremendous fear and shame and almost like terror because at the end of we had to attend church 3 times a week. And so at the end of every service, my grandfather would say, and I can smile about it now, but he would say, if you have sinned and not come forward and confessed it in front of this group, and you drive home today and you get in a car accident, you're going to spend eternity in hell. And so
Mm.
you can imagine as a child the terror and the shame associated with knowing that you didn't believe what you were being taught because that wasn't my internal experience with God as even as a child and what I was reading it didn't resonate. And so it was a really kind of dark time for me. And then alongside that, home was not a safe place. One of my parents was very emotionally and physically abusive. And by the time I was in high school, it had reached a point where I really needed to leave home to protect myself. And so it was about midway through my senior year. I was 17, and I literally packed a bag in the middle of the night, climbed out of a second story bedroom window, and ran on foot to my best friend's home. And her family were one of the very few people who knew what was happening behind closed doors. So they took me in and really kept me safe until I could live with a family member until I turned 18 and then was kind of launched into the real world. But I had such tremendous shame around what was happening to me at home that I never told anybody. I kept it all, it was like a shame cave. And so when I look back on that season, and I've really never shared that deeply personal part of my story, the reason that I do is because I think so many of us that have journeyed on this have had some version of spiritual trauma in
Mm.
some way, shape, or form. I mean, almost everyone I talk to today will share that.
Yes,
Like
I hear it too, Jessica,
they're
big time, yeah.
yeah, they're longing for a connection with something greater, with God, with the divine, but the version that they were taught was so painful that they don't see a way to back to that. And so the reason I share that, I think it's important to name gently and truthfully.
Yep.
But also, I think the reason I resonated with your work so much is that part of my journey and really healing for me when I later found this work was starting to untangle that relationship with God from the fear and rigidity of my childhood. And just to share that what has emerged on the other side for me is something I never expected, which is a relationship with God and the divine that is so spacious and safe and intimate.
Mm.
And, just to say that there is a way through the pain to reconnect with what is sacred and grounded. And for me, when I chose to leave home, I I chose to leave a very large extended family that was deeply ingrained. I had cousins that lived next door and aunts and uncles and grandparents in this church. And in me leaving, it was made very clear that I was no longer welcome if I didn't return, verbally and in writing. They would write me letters. And so that was a big part of the weight that I carried into adulthood. And then later, when I really found this work, was a tremendous source of grief. It was like a well of grief that just kept coming. And obviously, that is where you and I connected on a deeper level as well as the grief work. And if there was one thing that I could say sums up my journey of healing, it would be grief. Like, and it's
Wow.
still
Yeah.
unfolding, right? And I think you can get to a point too where grief really is it's such a sacred experience and emotion. And when you create space for it, there's so much healing that can come with that and acceptance on what is and what you've experienced, and that this is the journey your soul has in this lifetime, right? I can't change what it was that I experienced. So, anyways, I that's the hard part.
So let's pause there for a moment and just like witness that because that's immensely
Yeah,
challenging. There's so many layers there, and it's interesting because you left the toxicity, like
yeah,
you left that home, and and you chose differently because maybe again this part of you that was finally able and had the capacity to do it, and all the things fell into place. And yeah, and you had this friend who you could go to, and that's a gift in itself, right? Like what God putting people in our lives. And I think so many people listening can relate to the shame, the religious shame,
yeah,
right? The condemnation, the stories that we hold coming from authorities, religious authorities, family, authorities within our family, and how immensely challenging that can be, especially on a young growing mind. And then bringing in these again, it did really create this story of a shame, right? A shame story. And you said a shame cave you described. Like that's profound. And so I'm really kind of curious, at the time, I'm assuming you didn't have the capacity to really even connect to that shame and grief. So it became this cave.
Yeah.
and
Very.
you did what you had to do
Mhm.
to survive,
Yeah.
to live, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it took tremendous strength to do that. I really was the cousin that was like, is nobody questioning this? Am I the only one asking the questions? Right. But, a lot of ways we are biologically hardwired to be in the family, to
Yeah.
stay in. So I really had to turn off and bury that so deeply. And I was really kind of launched into this world as a young woman, very young. I had to support myself. And so what that looked like for me was entering into the workspace, high performing, high level at a very young age. And what I noticed right away is I was receiving positive attention for what felt like the first time in my life based on two
Mm.
things: my performance and my appearance. And so I became very hypervigilant about those, about how showing up perfectly and perform perfectly. I was working in a, very masculine finance space. There was no room for processing grief or what
Mm.
no one knew where I came from. It was sink or swim. And so a lot of the coping mechanisms I developed, because what that ultimately looked like was disordered eating, completely bypassing my physical and emotional needs, body dysmorphia, all the things we develop. It saved my life in a lot of ways. I needed
Mhm.
that at the time. There was no space for crumbling. I had to support myself. And so, you know, that was really the lens in which I operated through for most of my adult life: was how do I perform perfectly? How do I show up perfectly? How do I have a never ending list of achievements to accomplish? Um, and really not even knowing why half the time I was doing that, right? It felt like life or death, the internal experience. I can look back at that time. And then when I look back, I've always lived in a sensitive body. I mean, from a young age, my body has spoken loudly through physical sensation. I was constantly sick. I always had GI symptoms have always been kind of my foundational way that my body communicates with me through. I had the random acute kidney infection. I was hospitalized for at like age 7. Nobody could make sense of it. If you look into even like, if we get into like the deeper like Chinese medicine, what do the kidneys represent? They represent fear, right? And
Mm.
so I always had symptoms. They got louder when I got into high school with anxiety and depression. And then in adulthood, they just compounded. And so I was living life at a full sprint. My body was starting to speak to me louder. I think I had 2 or 3 colonoscopies alone in my 20s and endoscopies trying to figure out what's going on. Everyone's like, nothing's wrong with you. We can't find anything.
Wow, yeah.
I went to the ER thinking I had thinking I was having a heart attack. And they're like, oh, you're fine. They send you home and they prescribe, some kind of medication for you. It's just a panic attack. And I always felt short of breath and I felt like someone was sitting on my chest. And of course, no one ever says to me, this sounds like anxiety. They're sending me to the hospital to get, the oxygen level test in my bloodstream. And so, there was a lot of fear and dysregulation around what was happening, but I was always really able to kind of white knuckle it through and just like linebacker through whatever the symptoms were. But it had gotten to the point in my late 20s where it was really impacting the quality of my life, and not finding relief through the conventional route is when I started to seek out like holistic healthcare. So
Mm.
I started working with, naturopathic doctors and nutritionists and holistic kind of practitioners. And that, you know, there was a period of time where that did help me. It did help to start to make changes to my lifestyle, and the container that holistic practitioners provide is so different. They're listening, they care. And so I think part of it was probably just that. But that ultimately is what led me to leave a career in finance and go back to school to become a registered dietitian and go into nutrition and health. But there was such a rigidity, Vanessa, to everything I did, right? Like almost like a rigidity and a righteousness to like, oh, you have to eat this way and move this way. It certainly wasn't through any kind of compassionate lens. And
Yeah.
so, I switched careers. again, that gave me something really to focus on. I threw myself into the integrative medicine and functional medicine space, really learning about it. And I thought that it really was like the answer to everyone's problems. And then life was just getting busier. I was living life at a full sprint. I mean, the number of times people have said to me, I don't know how you do it all. It's like, well,
Mm.
I do it and it comes at a cost. But now I was adulting. I was married. I had children. The responsibilities were piling on top of each other. And my body and my soul were longing to get off of this hamster wheel. Like I just remember knowing like this is not sustainable. And then there were just a couple of key tipping points that tipped me over, and I was never able to write myself back up. Because at this point, I was living, I feel like if we look at like the nervous system, I was living in fight or flight or freeze. I lost that like parasympathetic break. So I was
Yep.
just like full blast or crashing for a day, full blast,
Yes.
crashing for a day. I was exhausted all the time. I was drinking 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day, still working out, doing all the things. And then I got COVID. And so COVID, I got it relatively early on. I got the Delta strain back when we named them, and I got really sick. And at this point, I'm working at a pretty robust functional medicine clinic with a team of amazing, doctors and medical providers. We are immersed in COVID, like coronavirus research and what are the things we can do. We're in functional medicine, so we're not just doing one thing. And so there was a tremendous amount of fear and unknown around it. And then I got sick, and I got so sick that I think everyone was pretty surprised at how sick I was. And I remember a couple days in, I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. I really thought I was going to develop like severe respiratory symptoms. And so I called the medical team, and they're like, okay, we're going to prescribe this medication for you that was a little bit off the label used for COVID at the time. And I took one pill, and within like 4 to 6 hours, I was like breathing perfectly again,
Mm.
which is not how the
It worked.
medication works.
Yeah.
And it's like, even the studies that were done showed like you had to take it for like a week or 10
Mm.
days to really have it help you. And I think I literally only took it for 2 or 3 days. And I was like, breathing okay, but I was still really sick. And I was a couple days in, and I woke up and I felt sensation on one side of my face, right side of my
Mm.
face. And I remember jumping out of bed and thinking that I was getting Bell's palsy and running to the mirror to see, like, oh my gosh, which is the condition where your face freezes or it kind of droops. And I didn't get it, but I'm sure when I look back, there probably was a discussion around it in the clinic. I'm sure that it was on my radar, but that became the beginning of this hyper awareness of that part of my body. So my brain became aware, okay, I'm worried about this side of my body. And at the same time, I developed these strange neurological symptoms on the right side of my body.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
I'm in a master's program at this time, and I'm
Oh,
needing
wow.
to like lay in bed and like get, assignments done. And I noticed, oh, my right hand can't quite keep up with my left. And when I would walk, like I felt like my right leg was slightly slower than my left. And so it was concerning to me, but you kind of just brush it off and you keep living life. And so, went back to work, went back to life, but the following 2 years were really where things started to go downhill. And I started to collect a series of diagnoses and start to have a lot more symptoms showing up in my body. So the first was the sensation in the right side of my face started to get louder. It became more of like tingling. It wasn't quite pain, but it was definitely noticeable that something was going on. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. I'm working in a functional medicine clinic, so I can test
Yeah.
anything at any given time. I'm immersed in this stuff. So I test positive for Lyme. I test positive for a co-infection called Bartonella.
Yep.
I test positive to autoimmunity to multiple parts of my brain. I
Wow.
have like a specialized MRI, and it shows, a lesion. And so I am starting to get concerned alongside what I'm experiencing in my body that I have early signs of a neurodegenerative disorder like multiple sclerosis or even
Mhm.
Parkinson's. I started to really get worried about that. I had recurrent SIBO. So I have probably tested SIBO a dozen times positive, treat it, it goes away, it comes back. I'll share how that kind of
Oh, yes.
built.
Many people are gonna wanna know that.
And then I'd always experienced dysautonomia, but it was getting worse to the point where I would be at the grocery store with my kids unloading groceries, and I would actually think I'm gonna pass out right now. Like,
Mm.
the lights set me off pretty significantly. And then a few times I would be in my office with a patient and I would think I'm actually gonna pass out right now, and I'd have to excuse myself and leave and go lay down in another office to get triage, and they'd have to excuse my patient. And I just, like, carried on. I don't even think I came home and told my husband about it. I just knew it was, well, it's showing up in my body, and I think part of it too was that I was coming to the end of this master's program and a couple other intense certification programs that I was finishing, and I knew I was like, "Okay, I just have to, like, army crawl over the finish line with these things, and then I will take care of myself." I knew this wasn't sustainable, but, life had other plans for me. And
Yeah.
so, the what's interesting was there were a couple of acute things that happened to me that actually led to the explosion of a lot of the symptoms. The first was I had sought out an alternative treatment where they inject a numbing agent into the pain in your face
Yep.
that they use in dentistry. I mean, this is how desperate you are. You're like really
Yeah.
try. And so it's like Procaine. It's a numbing agent they use in dentistry, and this provider injects it into my face and doesn't tell me that my face is going to go numb. And so the experience goes completely sideways. And the day after that, I developed pretty significant pain in my deep in my head and face. But after a couple weeks, it just went away like almost overnight. And then we'd had a really crazy acute experience where it was just one of those kind of wild things where our house alarm had malfunctioned in the middle of the night. And long story short, police had come to our home and they thought someone had broken into our home and they thought we were the intruders. And so
Oh, wow.
including my daughter, were held at gunpoint in the middle of the night. And, obviously, as you know how traumatic that experience would be.
Of
And
course.
then, like, 3 days later, that's when everything really started to kick up. And so it's really interesting kind of looking back on the timeline of how things started to get louder that were really a result of some kind of traumatic experience. It wasn't, the Lyme. I was at the time, I was like, "Oh, it's the Lyme, it's the Bartonella, it's all the things." No, it was the trauma that I'd experienced that exceeded my capacity to handle it. And so
Yes, it was so much, right? Like, it's never just one thing. It's like you
Mhm.
see the beautiful example of multiple things, right? And your
Yeah.
capacity just being yeah, wow, wow.
And just not enough time to recover. And so the final tipping point for me was my kids got sick. They came home with some kind of virus and I picked it up. And instead of staying home and taking care of myself, I went to work. And I remember being so sick at work and just like limping through the day and limping through the week. And instead of going home and taking care of myself, I had social events. I was the yes girl. I said yes to everything. And so I made it to Friday, and I remember just falling into bed on Friday night, waking up on Saturday. I'm in the kitchen making coffee, of course, and it just feels like something has exploded on the side of my head, and I just fall to the ground. And my husband has to call 911, and my kids are crying, and the ambulance comes and
Mm,
takes me to the ER, and they do their workup and they're like, "We can't find anything wrong with you. Follow up with your primary care physician." And there was some concern that it again was potentially the early symptoms of MS, multiple sclerosis, but it was just kind of like, well, let's just wait and see kind of thing. And so I went home in a tremendous amount of pain in my face and head, and followed up with my primary care like the next day, who is a brilliant medical doctor. She's the woman I worked with, medical director at my clinic. And, she spent time with me and she went over my symptoms and she said, everything you're presenting with is a diagnosis of trigeminal neuralgia. And there's really not much that can be done to help you with the pain. There was discussion around maybe trying like a medication, but they're not super hopeful for that. And it's kind of just like one of those things where you're like, let's take this and see what happens after a couple weeks. And there was discussion around it being like a post-viral neuralgia, but ultimately, regardless, she basically said, there's really nothing that I can do for you here, and sent me on my way. And so I remember leaving, my husband was with me. I'm in pretty severe pain, and we leave. And I think, one of the biggest blessings of my life at the time is that I was very close friends with another medical doctor who I knew practiced medicine very differently. I didn't even quite understand how she practiced medicine. I knew they had a somatic therapist that they wanted you working with, like right out of the gate. And I knew the healing work that came from the work she did was profound. And so I went directly to her, and I just remember sitting in the room, and she comes in and I'm crying, I'm hysterical. And I'm just like, my life is over. It felt like a death sentence to me in a lot of ways. And she sits down in front of me and she takes my hand and she says, I said, I have trigeminal neuralgia, nothing can be done. And she just held my hand and she looked me in the eye and she said, Jessica, she said, if you want to label this trigeminal neuralgia, she said, if that makes you feel safer, she said, you can. But she said, I don't practice medicine with labels. And she said, I believe what is happening right now is a culmination of many things you've experienced in your lifetime. I believe that you absolutely can fully heal from this. And
Mm.
she said, and what your body is trying to do right now, what you're feeling is it's actually trying to heal. And she said, and you have everything within you right now that you need to heal. And so I remember
Wow.
the, and I think maybe she said that because she was a close friend, but I believed her. I was like, okay, great. Show me what I need to do to heal. And, it was a deeper conversation because she went on to say, you know, look, you're being called to a much deeper level of healing in this lifetime. She's like, not everybody will be called to this. And she said, but if you're
Mm.
willing to do the work, your life will change for the better. And so I thought that was great, but I'm like, well, what's this work? Right. And so she didn't really have a clear path for me. And she didn't know about this whole field of work. She just knew that that was her experience in working with people. It's like, you can heal from this. And so I left there feeling a lot more hopeful. I went home that night and I remember I slept well, the pain was down. And then, of course, the next day it comes roaring back. And the next few days are really intense. Like the pain is starting to, skyrocket. And so with trigeminal neuralgia, there's oftentimes concern that something in the mouth is contributing to it, like a tooth
Yep.
infection or something. And so I had consulted with a dentist I knew at the time who lived, a plane ride away. And I remember calling him and saying, like, I've been diagnosed with this. Can you help me? And the first thing he said to me, he said, oh no, he said, trigeminal neuralgia, that's the suicide disease. He said, don't do it. He said, I just want you to know that's what it's called because it's so painful. And I just remember, Vanessa, hearing him say that and knowing how inappropriate it was to say that to anybody, more more or less a
Yeah.
provider or patient. But you're so desperate for help that I just kind of picked it up and set it aside. And I was just like, can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I can help you. And so I jumped on a plane with my husband that day, flew down, met with him, and fortunately didn't do what he recommended and came home so dejected and in so
Mhm.
much pain that for the next few days, I actually couldn't sleep. I couldn't be still in my body at all. I had to constantly be moving. So at night, when everyone was sleeping, I just like walk the halls of the house. And I think we were about 3 days into that. And we call my doctor and we're just like, is there anything that can be done? Because we were doing things to try to um, help me, but nothing was moving the needle at all. And so she said, okay, here's what I want you to do. She said, I want you to go outside, get out of your house, get out into the sunshine. And at the time, my daughter was doing, it's called the Safe and Sound Protocol. It's this
Yes, I'm
safe,
familiar with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
music therapy developed by Stephen Porges. And essentially, it's supposed to like tone the vagus nerve, calm the nervous system. So my daughter was doing that at the time. And she said, I want you to go outside, lay in the grass, and listen to this music for 15 minutes. I was like, okay. And at this point, I'm so exhausted. I'm walking around with like a hood over my face because everything's too loud and too bright. And so I go outside, I lay down, I pop the earbuds in. It's like Disney music. I listen to it for 15 minutes. And at the end, I kind of doze off and and the music turns off and I open my eyes and the pain has literally shut off. Like someone had gone into a control room and just flipped the switch.
Wow.
And not even like at this point, it had been hard to keep my eyes open. When you're in that much pain, everything is too much. Like you just want to go into a dark room and be alone. And it wasn't even like a pain level of 2, it was a 0. It was completely gone.
Wow.
And I remember it was the end of the day and it was the sun was setting. And I just remember looking around because everything looked so different and peaceful. And I was in awe of, what I was seeing, but I was also in awe of what my body had just done. Because if my body could shut the pain off that quickly, I knew that this was my nervous system. I didn't know what the path was, but I knew there had to be hope for me that it could do that. I wish that was the end of my story and I could say like, oh, safe and sound saved me. But it wasn't. My journey was long, but the pain was gone for like 12 hours. And then, and believe me, I was doing that safe and sound religiously. And it's still, it was probably the perfect moment of like surrender and belief from my doctor and all the things. Right. So meanwhile, I knew about a clinic in the Midwest. I live in California that treated neuropathic disorders. They specialized in CRPS. My mom had had CRPS a decade prior, so I knew
Interesting.
what I knew what that is like for a person. I knew what happened when they were kind of shunted into the conventional medical route when you have CRPS, and I knew that wasn't going to be for me. That wasn't the outcome I was looking for, and so I had followed this clinic and I'd been amazed with their outcomes. And so as soon as I got the diagnosis, I had scheduled a call with their medical director. And so within a week of my diagnosis, I was on a consult with her and she just said, look, trigeminal neuralgia is CRPS of the face and head. She said, we can help you. Can you get out here? And I said, absolutely. Because at this point, the field that I had worked in, I had been witness to healing on so many levels. Like I had seen people fully recover from MS, from early stage dementia, from cancer, from severe autoimmunity. So I think for me, the reason I never really panicked with the symptoms I had is I always believed, oh, I can heal from this. I just need
Yeah. So you had like that belief, right?
I
That, yeah.
believed in healing. What I had never seen anyone heal from was a neuropathic condition, a nerve condition, a neuralgia. I had seen the opposite. I had seen my mom, who still lives with chronic pain, and I'd seen other people in my life who had journeyed neuralgia, and it was grim. It was dire. There wasn't good outcomes. And so for me, this diagnosis really did feel like a life sentence. And so I was desperate to find someone to help me. And so this clinic I thought was going to be the golden ticket for me. And so she was like, can you get out here? I was like, absolutely. And so within 2 weeks of my diagnosis, I had moved my family halfway across the United States to attend this clinic in the hopes that they would heal me. And in the week leading up to moving, what's ironic is that I was so sure this was it, that every day I was getting better and better. And to the
Mm.
point where when I flew out, I was saying, oh, I'm 90% better. And I was still really weak from the trauma of it all, but the pain was like 90% better. So when I got
Yeah.
there, I was like, oh, I'm going to be like their star pupil. I'm going to whip through this clinic faster than anyone else has and come home, and it's never going to happen to me again because they will have healed me. That's not what happened.
Mm.
So I get there and, they say they're actually amazing and they are very knowledgeable in all of this work. But they said, look, you likely will get worse before you get better here. And they kind of called it like poking the bear of the nervous system. And so that was terrifying to me, actually. So I started their work. And then within a week, not only did the pain come roaring back, but it spread to my whole face and my whole head. And
Oh, wow.
so, I'm out there and I'm supposed to be there for 3 to 4 months, and they're saying, "Just stick with it." They were saying, "Be the buffalo charges the storm." I'm like, "Okay, I'll be the buffalo." But ultimately, it was not, I needed to come home. I wasn't getting better. I was significantly worse. It actually was starting, the neuralgia was starting to make its way down my neck into my whole body. But there were two key things that I learned while I was there. The first was curable. I had somehow stumbled upon curable. So I was introduced to this concept of neuroplastic pain. And then the second was I had started to work with a pain therapist through the clinic who had just attended a training with Howard Schubner on
Oh,
pain
wow.
therapy.
What are the
And
chances?
she was like, "I want to introduce this to you, and I'd love to do some of like the somatic tracking work." And I was like, "Okay." So I started to do a little bit of the work. I was introduced to it. I still really believed I had a neurodegenerative condition. I needed to come home. And for me, I really needed to just kind of know either way. Do I have it or don't? And so I don't think I would have continued to heal there. So I came home kind of my tail between my legs and went back under the care of my doctor. And one of the first things she asked is, "Can you do one of the brain retraining programs?"
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Okay." And the funny thing is, Vanessa, is we have known about them. We had recommended them for years in our functional medicine clinic, but I think there's a lot of reasons for this, but it was very hard to get anyone to want to do it, to buy into it. And I think it has a lot to do with how you position it. I think if there's still belief that all these other things can help you, why the heck are you going to go down that route?
Right.
So I knew about it. And so when she asked me to do it, I was like, okay. And so I started the program. And ultimately, the one I'd started wasn't the best fit for me, but it introduced me to two really important things. The first was this concept of identifying my thoughts, especially catastrophizing thoughts, and redirecting them. And I noticed right away, like my pain and the experience in my body around that wasn't changing, but I felt a little better at constantly, because I was swimming in catastrophizing thoughts 24/7
Yep.
about pain. I didn't talk about it with a lot of people, but I talked about it all the time. It was what I swam, this like dirty pool that I just swam in all the time. And then the second thing was meditation. So it wanted you to meditate in the morning and in the evening for like 20 to 30 minutes, a guided meditation. So you're listening to someone speak to you. And I noticed right away that it was giving me capacity to fall asleep and stay in my
Mm.
body. It was the first time I could stay in my body.
Wow.
And so and not only would it help me fall asleep, but then when I would wake up at night, it would help me get back to sleep. Because at this point, if I was lucky, I slept 2-hour stretches.
Wow.
And, the amount of times that I would wake my husband up in the middle of the night just in complete, devastation and what was happening. I think all of us on this journey know what it feels like when you're awake in the middle of the night and it's so alone and it's dark and it's just such a dark time. And so meditation gave me this capacity and ability to get back to sleep. And so I started to feel like, wow, I have some agency here. And so again, it wasn't changing my pain, but it started to change my experience with the pain a little bit. And then I don't even know how I found you. I think it was through, must have been through probably, being in the brain retraining. And somehow I found you on Instagram. And I remember seeing your story you had shared and your recovery, and our experiences, our symptoms were quite different, but I couldn't believe what you had recovered from. And you were just getting ready to launch, I think, Haven, and
Yeah.
sharing these like recordings. And so I was still in so much pain, but every night and every morning I would lay out I remember laying in my backyard in my patio in this big bean bag, just listening to your voice over and over and over. And, again, my pain wasn't changing yet, but I was starting to get hope, and my experience was changing. And I just thought, well, if she can recover, there's got to be a way for me to recover too. And then you introduced me to Alan Gordon. And I
Yep.
remember I think you just shared a post about it one day, I think his book, The Way Out. And I remember I downloaded it and it was the same day I had actually trialed intranasal ketamine for the first time to try to get some relief from the pain. And I just laid on the floor and listened to the book all on one day. And it was the first time that I heard my story. Everything that it shared. I mean, first of all, he's hilarious. Just
Yeah, I love Alan. Yeah.
on Audible. It's so funny to listen to because he reads it himself. But it was the first time that I was like, this is my story. This is my path out. And I remember like standing in my kitchen and just thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm actually going to start living as if I'm fully healed. I'm not going to even talk about the pain anymore. And so I think my family had a little bit of whiplash because I'd been talking about it like 24/7. And all of a sudden, I just stopped. I didn't talk about it. I just started to slowly try to do the things that, I wanted to do. And then there's all these series of synchronicities that lead you to, then I found Nicole Sachs' work. And her work was the first time she had a success story that I listened to that sounded very similar to mine. We're always trying to find
Yes,
they
yes.
had something similar. And it wasn't the same, but it was close in terms of, trigeminal neuralgia and all of that. And ironically, it was like the worst case she'd ever treated. But the woman had fully recovered. And I was like, okay, there's hope for me. And so again, I was starting to get more hope and kind of building my list like, okay, there's hope. I can do this. And so, I was introduced to her journal speak, and it was, a part of my story. I definitely journaled in the beginning quite a bit. But even the thought of journaling for me, I remember I was really resistant to starting. And even the thought for like 3 days, the pain I'd been experiencing just skyrocketed, even thinking about it.
Look at that. Yeah.
And then I committed to starting. And I distinctly remember one day journaling about something I'd never said out loud, never shared with anybody. And the pain in my face just ripped forward. And
Wow.
so I was starting to get, evidence that it was deeply connected to this emotional part of me.
Right. Yep.
It's still very hard to believe when you're in it. Even that,
Right.
you're like, oh, are you sure? And so as I'm starting to journal and unpack, I'm realizing, I think it'd be really helpful for me to have someone to journey alongside, especially the trauma I'd experienced. And so that's when, I'm out on a walk and I'm listening to a podcast because that's all I started doing. Like we all do, we immerse ourselves in the work. I heard Christy Beebe, who is a therapist and very connected to this world, obviously, talking, and she's talking about working with a woman with curly brown hair and face pain. And this woman had recovered after years of having it. And I was like, okay. So I reached out to her and ultimately I've been able to work with her for a couple of years now. She's amazing. So, she's with the Better Mind Center. So if you're ever looking for a
Right.
therapist, her work is incredible in this field. And then along the way, I really realized too, like, we're really not meant to heal alone. We're not biologically even hardwired to heal alone. Like there's so much shame that's associated with, first of all, being sick and
Yep.
being, I mean, I wanted to go into a cave of healing, heal, and then come out like Jesus and be like, I'm healed.
Yeah.
And have this like
We
amazing,
all wanna do that, right?
have this like amazing story to share. And I had a lot of shame because, the amount of times people said to me, you're the healthiest person I know. Like, how could this
Yeah.
happen to you? Which isn't helpful, by the way. And so I realized, okay, I can't hide anymore. I have to come out. I have to get connected with community. And that's when I started connecting with you more and getting involved in your work and really with Haven. And then, ended up doing even like the 10-week grief group with you and was really immersed in finding my own community. It was really important for me I had to quiet the noise. So it got to a point where I had gathered enough evidence that healing was possible for me, my own personal evidence list that I'd collected where I would record when the pain would come and go and all of that. And then I'd had my kind of a list of recovery stories that I
Yeah.
knew were really inspirational for me. And then I needed to kind of quiet the noise and really start to live my life, um, and and be connected with who I thought would be really supportive for that. And so I had to, I was still pretty vulnerable and I needed to kind of quiet the noise because there's a lot. There's so much
There is.
information. It's
There is. Yeah.
growing. It's sometimes it's conflicting. And so that's when I also found a coach that I ended up working with named Jeannie, which we worked together quite a bit as well. And that kind of brought me to what healing looked like for me. And so, recovery for me was never about following like a rigid protocol or a
Yes.
program. It was really about finding this deep daily rhythm that my nervous system could trust because for me, I had been sprinting full blast and then it was like I hit a brick wall and all these pieces fell apart. My life came to a screeching halt and I had to figure out like, who am I? Like, what pieces do I want to pick back up? What does this look like for me? And so I realized that, I had no rhythm. Like, I think rhythm, our bodies crave rhythm, those predictable, like touch points of safety that
Yes. Yes.
throughout the day that is communicating to yourself, your nervous system, that you actually are safe and that it is okay to, go out into the world. And so it really kind of lived inside this question of how would I care for a child that I really loved? How would I care for one of my children? And what does a child need, right? Like a child needs movement. They need to be outside every day to some
Yeah.
degree. Their eyeballs need to be in nature.
Yeah.
They regular meal times. Like we know what happens if a child skips a meal. It's not,
Yeah. No.
they need like wind down rituals and wake up rituals. I was used to like my feet hit the ground, I had on the coffee pot, my laptop opened. I couldn't do that anymore. I needed to start communicating to my nervous system, my body through rhythm, daily rhythm, that I actually am safe, that it's okay to be here. It's okay to not be trying to protect me with this pain. And so that's really what I set out. And then, self-compassion. My God, if grief was one prominent emotion, the other thing was so much self-compassion, just
Yeah.
like you would have for your child, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
play and trying to, bring in joy while you're still in pain and while you're still healing. And so that's really what I set out to create for myself. And, the thing is, life is going to show you when you go, you always say this, and I've said this many times, I've repeated it like you live while you heal and you heal while you live. And life is going to show you as you live where you have bypassed yourself, where your
Yes.
boundaries are porous, where you're really activated by certain things. And that's the healing process when you kind of awaken to this work and you start to build capacity and resources to
Yeah.
navigate through that. But I would say too, like, we're not meant to do this alone. Like, it's so important to have someone or people walking alongside you on this journey, just obviously with all the beautiful work you're doing, because it is a hard journey. It is longer. And so, the things, what it looked like for me was meditation. Meditation was a soothing balm from the beginning. I know it's not for everyone. It was mostly guided meditation, but it really taught me to become a compassionate witness to whatever I was experiencing, to be able to really kind of notice things,
Yeah.
from a distance without getting swept up. Um, I know he's not for everyone, but I really resonated with Joe Dispenza's work. I
Yeah.
still do, his book, Break the Habit of Being Yourself, really, and his meditations and your visualization work really taught me how to um, embody emotions before they happened. And so I was able to embody what I thought it would feel like if I was fully healed. And I would spend time in that emotionally as much as I
Yes.
could, right? And so really trying to practice. I mean, this is all the work, beautiful work you do,
Yeah.
Tessa, like feeling ahead of, the evidence. And it really looked like really nourishing myself at bedtime and wake up. So bedtime became almost like, I used to just stare at my phone until I fell asleep. And now
Yeah.
it was this, I wanted to romanticize this for myself, just like I would do for my, 9-year-old son right now, who really needs that still.
Yeah.
Is it looked like a bath or, some gentle stretching or some yoga nidra or listening to one of your, it just was a way to communicate to my system, hey, we're approaching bedtime, right? And the same with morning. I
Yep.
allow myself to wake up. Maybe it's just 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but it's not, let's hit the ground running, which is
Yes.
saying, oh no, we have to, whatever it is, fight or flight. No, we wake up gently and we give ourselves that time
I
to
love that you saying that you're kind of describing the opposite of what you did before, right? The rigidity. So we know the recipe for TMS, right? Mind body symptoms is urgency, pressure, right? All of that intensity, like those are literally the recipe for pain in a sense, for chronic pain. And it comes from that place of, pressure, achieving, we have all
yeah,
these qualities. And when we're approaching healing from that same space,
right.
we're basically replacing one thing for another. It doesn't it's like I always say we can't if we're approaching healing in the same way that got us sick, we
Yeah.
might not get very far.
Yeah,
So I
totally.
love that you were able to witness that and say, I'm going to heal differently. I'm going to bring in flexibility. I'm going to bring in compassion. I'm going to make this a way of life versus something so rigid and complex. And I know we both kind of have experiences with the more rigid brain retraining programs,
Yeah.
and when we both know that that's that, especially if you're coming from that place, it's not gonna be supportive. It's literally reinforcing the stress response, and yeah, and then that's kind of what when people come to me, they're like, well, what do you mean I don't have to do it like this?
Yeah.
Like, no, now weave
Yep.
it into your life. And
Yeah.
you just described a beautiful way of doing that, of like, I'm gonna honor this space in the morning to be with what is and to support and to prime myself for my day.
Yeah.
And then same with the evening. I'm gonna give myself that gift because that's
Mm.
what it really is. It's a gift. It's a conscious choice where it doesn't feel like forced. It
Mhm.
becomes a way of life. Like, I don't know if you kind of find that now. Is that something you continue to do right now, right? Like as you're
Yeah, I think we all will do that, and I understand the need. I was like that too, just like you were when we're like
yeah.
looking for the program, and that really isn't where, and it's okay. I mean, that's your first entry point into it. And then it's this settling into life. And, mindfulness was another key thing that I could do that I really embraced. Like anything I was doing, I was constantly bringing myself back to the present moment. And I was noticing what I was doing in the kitchen when I was chopping. I would stop and smell all the spices. I made it a point when I would go to the grocery store that I would smile and talk to the people. It wasn't about doing a program, it was about my life almost becoming the program. And when I'd go on my
Yes.
walks, I would look at the trees. I heard someone say, count 10 different trees or bushes on your walk. I was like, okay. And so I started doing that. And in the beginning, it's not super intuitive, like, but over time, what has happened for me, because this was about a 2-year journey for me to get to where I am today, it was longer. Over time, what happened is the more you bring yourself back to the present moment, the more you notice where you're at and what you're doing, all of a sudden you kind of waken up to the awe of life. Because
Yes.
I don't even remember a lot of my years of an adult. I
Yeah.
was checked out. And now I'm so deeply present that it's brought a lot of beauty into my life. I mean, life is still lifey. I still feel things in my body all the time. And, movement, I think you and I I've shared with you, like I really got into 5 rhythms,
Yeah.
which is an amazing sort of movement. So for me, movement has always been a way for me to metabolize emotion. I kind of metabolize emotion more during movement. And so
Yep.
it's been a really beautiful, and it's playful. I wasn't
Yeah.
allowed to dance as a child, so it was healing on a lot of different levels. And then the grief work. I did a lot of grief work through with you and your resources. And it was just, I mean, it was endless grief. I would go on these walks, and music has always really helped me kind of emote and access those deeper parts of
Me
me.
too.
So I would
Mhm.
put music in, and I would be walking, and I would be able to allow the emotion to come up. And so I'd go on these walks and like, I mean, I still do them. I mean, they're not always as emotional, but I would just allow myself to cry or
Yeah.
sob when I needed to on these walks. And I would go out and I'd come home, and sometimes my family wouldn't even know that's what I just did. But it was this space for me to metabolize and feel, and then come home and maybe be tender, more tender for the day. But you don't have to be in the work all the time, like with grief.
Yes.
Like you have these periods where, I remember you telling me that you're like,
Yeah.
don't be in it all the time. Give yourself the space. And then you want to go back to, whatever it is that you want to be doing. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
the grief work, and, then I got into internal family systems.
Yeah.
This was a long journey. So it's not like you're doing it all at once. It naturally comes to you and presents to you when it's time.
And also, do you agree that as you're so we you build this foundation of more safety, more regulation, understanding kind of the mind body connection, and as you start to evolve, you have capacity for more of these things, right? Like you kind of we can see this
Totally.
natural evolution, right? Of okay, I'm doing the meditation, I'm somatic tracking, I'm building some capacity, and then it's like, ooh, the grief shows up, the
Yeah,
shame
totally.
shows up, and I have capacity for that, and then it's like now these parts are showing up and I'm getting curious about the internal family systems. And yeah, it's a beautiful evolution and kind
It
of
really
brings
is.
us back to that idea of, like healing never really ends. We're kind of in a constant flow of healing and moving with, and it's not a bad thing,
It's not a
right?
bad
It's
and
not.
two,
Yeah.
like the grief, I mean, there's grieving that comes with too when you no longer are going to show up as the person that you did. And
Oh,
I still grieve. There's still grief for me, and not knowing that now, not I wanted to be the pageant queen that just like waved at everyone. Everyone loved me. And that's not who I am anymore. And so sometimes that's not going to land well for
mhm.
whatever reason, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And you're not bypassing, and there's grieving with that. And so there are times, I mean, even recently, where I just put on my sweatshirt, my cozy socks, and I give myself space to realize, like, oh, that was hard. It was hard to allow myself to be authentically me and know that I mean, I'll land well with everyone,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
never ends. At some point, I really had to let go of the pain needing to be gone and just instead commit to the process of kind of rehoming myself, because it was a long journey for me. And this is what I'll share with anyone going through this. I had crazy flares until the very end. Like my brain and nervous system did not want to let go of this pain.
Yeah.
And I would have big flares to the very end with every symptom that I had. And then it would just peter off over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then I had the classic symptom impair. It moved around my
Oh
body,
my gosh, yeah.
burning hands, feet, mouth, and, my GI. So I'll wrap up and just say the SIBO that I've always thought was SIBO my whole life. I never thought it would go away. I genuinely thought, you know what, I'll probably live with this forever. It's fine. It's more annoying than interrupting.
Yeah.
And as I was doing this work, and this was in the last 6 months even, it started to get really loud to the extent that I thought, oh gosh, I think I maybe need to go get another colonoscopy and like get checked out. But I thought, you know what? No, nothing has changed in my life to warrant any of this. And I'm going to treat it the same way I have everything else. And it got really, really loud. And then it just petered off and went away. And
That's
it's
like extinction burst, right? Where it
that's a
peaks.
classic extinction burst with every
Yeah.
symptom. And so, that brings me to today where I have no chronic symptoms. I
Amazing.
sleep like a champ. Thank God. I wish that for everybody. We all know what it's like when sleep is hard. But I still feel things in my body all the time. I think that's the part of becoming attuned is your body starts to communicate with you
Yes.
clearly when things are off. And I'm just getting a little better at listening when it's whispering and not
Yes.
Like, if you want,
Screaming.
and I'm not perfect. There's times where I still push and push, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm going to get really loud. And then I'm like, okay, I hear you. And so, it will probably be a lifelong thing, but it's okay. Like, it's not, I don't
And
live in
I
fear
feel
that
like that's human too, right? In a sense,
that's
where we have I mean, if
100%.
you sit at a table with me and all of my girlfriends who've never had chronic illness,
Yeah.
someone will say, like, "I had a day where I was tired, so I took the day off," or
Yeah.
I had a headache," I whatever it might be, and I think when we are in we have the experience in the past of being hypervigilant and in chronic
Yeah.
illness, we attach stories to it,
Yeah.
whereas they don't. They're like, "It's just a headache," or, "Oh, my elbow hurts today." Big deal. And
Uh-huh.
so they don't have that background of the story, whereas many of us do. And I love how you said, now as my body communicates to me, right? It's a message. It's saying, "Hey, l let's slow down,
Yeah.
right? Let's support." And it's a beautiful way. And I wonder too, I'm like, if I had listened to the subtle
Yeah.
whispers back then, would I have ended up where I am? And what if this communication is okay? What if this communication is that way for me to know, right? It's kind of like the barometer of where things are at. But it doesn't have to be chronic. It doesn't have to be debilitating. It's just a message,
Yeah.
right? And we can and like you said, when we understand the language, like, of the body, of the messaging, everything changes, right? And so I
Yes.
know for myself, I'm always by choice going to support my mind and body.
Mhm.
I have a daily practice that I love,
Too.
I crave,
Me
that
too.
sets me up for my day, and it sounds like the same to you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it changes. I mean, it's changed so much. And then I'll go through periods where something will be hard, or I'll have gotten, we got the flu, and things are a little louder in my body. And so I change my practice. It needs to be a little more nourishing around
Yeah.
that time. And then it changes again. And so it really, there's a settling that happens within your body. And it took me a while. I mean, I was kind of stuck in that even early in the healing, like, oh, I can't wait to be healed so I can go out and do all the things. And so it took time for my system to realize, like, no, it's okay. It's okay to, have a slowness, which isn't really a slowness, right? I mean, we have time to do these things. And I think remembering too that the milieu of, we could call it the hormonal cascade that's associated with chronic pain or chronic stress actually is designed to make us feel like we don't have time. It's the
Mm.
point of it. And so knowing like, oh, I'm feeling this way, it's not true. I do have time for this. And just kind of softening around that. I think I used to kind of like white knuckle it, like, we're going to do this. And it's like, no, actually, I hear you. And I know you feel that urgency. And also, we're going to, just like we do with our child,
Yes,
we're
exactly.
also going to do this for ourselves. And so that's really where I've landed today. And yeah, that
So
brings,
tell us more about the Mind Body Kitchen and like, what you're doing now. I
yeah.
really wanna know.
Yeah. Well, the Mind Body Kitchen was obviously kind of birthed from my personal journey in this space, and my professional experience. And it's really me merging kind of modern nutrition science with mind body medicine with an overlay of what's called neuronutrition. So, neuronutrition is really the study of not only how does nutrition impact the nervous system, because it does, I mean, our literal nervous system and brain are built from nutrients. It's the raw material. Like when we talk about neuroplasticity and neurotransmitters and neuropeptides and neuromodulators, all the things that equate to neuroplasticity, the raw material of those are nutrients. They're needed. And so it's a study of that, but it's also the study of how the nervous system impacts nutrition. Because when we are living in chronic stress or chronic pain or any of the things that we're experiencing, that also can sometimes shift our nutritional needs. But also, the state of our nervous system impacts our experience with food, right? And so it's going to change how we digest and absorb, but also our relationship with food. So it's this understanding that they affect each other. And then it's really for me, my work is born from, it's grounded in the belief that neuroplasticity is going to happen more easily in a well nourished body when we're supporting both our beliefs with all of this beautiful work and our biology. And I think that's the piece that, a lot of us are hesitant to talk about because there is such activation around food. We've all
Oh,
experienced
yeah. Yeah.
elimination diets and the restriction and the white knuckling and the shame and even the cultural approach to nutrition and food. And so if we could just pick that up and set it aside and really start to look at, well, what are the ways that I can lovingly nourish myself with food? Historically we have gathered around meals, we have co-regulated with meals.
Mhm.
Being in the kitchen was a really grounding and kind of safety practice for ourselves. So, can we set aside what we shouldn't be eating and all the rules? And can we talk about, well, how can I lovingly support myself through food? How can I reestablish this relationship where I look forward to being in the kitchen in whatever capacity that we have? And, understand that there are a lot of ways that, food and nutrition can signal safety to our system. We wouldn't be sitting down to eat a meal if we were running or fighting. And so simply by having regular real meal rhythms, we're signaling safety to our system. And, a lot of the work I do too is not just around like how can we bring in the nourishment and what does that look like for you at the individual level, but how are we approaching our meals, right? There's so much
Yep.
to talk about what we
Yes.
receive, but
Yeah.
also what about how you're eating? So most of us are eating, or many of us are eating, and we're on our computer, or on our
Yeah, on her phone. Yep, we've
we're
all
like
been there.
not even in connection with the meal in front of us.
Right.
And the truth is that by looking and smelling and being in connection with our food, that begins digestion. So if we're not doing that, we can lose 30% of our digestive capacity before we even take a bite. So a
Oh,
lot of the people
wow.
I work with have a lot of GI related, that's what shows up in their body,
Yeah.
and that's where we're starting. Like, well, what's the context of how you're having your meal? Can we bring a small ritual that doesn't take a lot of time that can really help shift the experience of food in your body? And so that's really my hope in working with individuals right now, is to start it in this space, especially is to reframe the conversation away from what we've all experienced. Like just pick it up and set it aside
Yeah. Yeah.
and start to really talk about what are the ways I can really lovingly support myself with nutrition, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
this is so
uh,
exciting, Jessica.
it's
Yeah.
I was could
Uh
talk about it forever.
And we will actually, 'cause, you're gonna be coming into Haven for,
Yes.
a little guest appearance in the new year, and you're gonna share a lot more about this, but in the event that someone wants to contact you now,
Yeah.
um, we're gonna put all your details in the caption as well, but you're at or you wanna share, you're at the at
Yeah.
yeah, just
I'm
give
at
your
the
tags.
mindbodykitchen.com.
Okay.
And then the other way you can find me is on Instagram at the.mindbodykitchen. So
All right, perfect. This is so exciting. And before we go, before we wrap up, one last thing. If you wanted to, I mean, there's someone out there who's really struggling, they're in the throes of chronic stuff, pain, symptoms. What would be a hope rope to give them? What would you say to them to get them to keep going? Is there something that you would pass on to them?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think what was really important and what's coming through for me is you cannot do this alone. You cannot do it. We are just not meant to heal in isolation. We are not biologically hardwired for it. And so it's so important to find someone or someone's a community to journey alongside you in this, because it is a long and it's a hard journey, and there are so many that have walked before us. Like we're standing on the shoulders of the people who have gone
Yeah.
before us, and we're
Yeah.
all willing. I mean, the amount of times I would message you, Vanessa, and you would message me back, and just your voice alone would dial the intensity, dial the fear down because, and that's what you need. You're on this
Yep.
journey. The work is your own, but you need people walking alongside you in some way throughout the
Yeah.
journey. It really is so important.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely having that connection to community. I don't think I would be here where I am now had I not connected to,
I mean, yeah, and that's
like,
what Haven
yeah,
is all about. It's community, it's connection. There's no rigidity with anything that you provide. And I think that's maybe even sometimes, I think when people work with me, they're like, wait, you're not going to give me like exactly what to do. It's the same thing. It's like, no, that's not what I'm here to do for you. That's not going to help you at all. And so I would just say that would be my biggest thing is, and especially your grief resources. Grief's a hard one. Grief's a deep
it
one.
is. Yes, and I think not
Yeah,
many people realize it's part of the healing, and
really
I
is.
think everybody bypasses it, and they just kind of try and jump over it when in fact it's one of the deepest part of the healing, right? Just building safety with the emotions that come with grief,
Mhm.
and you're just yeah, I mean, I know you really kind of went into it, right? And with an open heart and again, that was part of your healing, the emotional processing, something
Yeah,
that we don't even expect. And so,
yeah. And
yeah, just
to you don't need to, like, go live on an ashram to do it. Like, you can
exactly.
create spaciousness, and you can get to a point where you're feeling grief and joy. You have space for all of it, but it's really important. The grief work is profound for healing.
Yes, yes, join us. We have, monthly classes if you wanted to try them out. Our next one is on shame. I'm really excited for that. But, thank you so much, Jessica. It was an
Thank you,
absolute
Vanessa.
pleasure to have
So
you.
great to be here.
And, yeah, and looking forward to having you. Stay tuned, in the new year. For those of you in Haven, we're gonna learn more from Jessica, and you're an absolute gift, and I feel so honored to have been a part of your journey, Jessica.
Same, Vanessa. Thank you so much for having me.